allow some people to arrive. But thank you again, everyone, for joining us for the latest edition of our weekly calls, which are a good chance to catch up on the issues impacting the industry and share ideas as to how the industry is working through this crisis. So as usual, I'll kick off with a very brief overview as to what we've been up to, and then I'll hand over to our guest, who I'm really pleased to hear from today, particularly pleased with the topic, because I think it's very topical and very relevant to the industry at the moment. So look forward to hearing from him shortly. Just from our point of view, I think the three things that I'd like to focus on this week. At the beginning of the week, we kicked off with the latest of our confidence trackers. So those are the surveys which go out to business leaders, and they effectively gauge optimism levels. So we ask a very simple question about how confident you are in the future of your organisation, and we did see quite a significant increase in the numbers of agency bosses feeling confident about the future. So that's a good thing. There was a slight dip about a month ago at the start of April, but since then there's been a steady increase. So we're hopeful that that points towards some optimism and some confidence with regards to the PR market. So it's something that we're keeping an eye on, but the latest figures are quite good. So if you'd like to have a look at that report, please do just head on to our newsroom, and you'll be able to read that and also read about the previous studies as well. We also kicked off a new mental well-being audit, and that's in partnership with ECO. It's being delivered by Opinion, the research company, which the mental well-being audit is a really in-depth look at all aspects of mental health, and it particularly looks at how this crisis and how COVID-19 has impacted people's well-being. So do look out for that survey link. It's on all our channels. We're promoting it heavily because we want as big a response to that survey as possible, and we want to use the data to kind of inform what the industry should be doing, both in terms of line management of employees, but also just looking after yourself and your own well-being. So do take that survey, and we'll share. I can share the link to it in this chat. Finally, yesterday we issued a response to the Black Lives Matter protest, which has emanated obviously from the United States, but has spread throughout society and throughout the country, particularly over the last few days. We've been speaking to colleagues internally for a couple of days about our response, and one of the things we did was gather a list of resources and links and petitions that our colleagues felt were important to signpost, and we published those in a thread yesterday alongside our corporate statement from Francis Ingham last night. So it's something that obviously we feel very passionate about. Our commitment to equality is of absolute paramount importance to everything that we do, and I think that what we've found is that over the past few days, I think businesses in general are kind of waking up to the need to really be proactive with it and to speak out. So it's something that we felt passionate about, and our response to that is hopefully summarizes that. I'm going to now hand over to our guest speaker. So I'm very, very pleased, genuinely pleased to introduce Scott Guthrie. So Scott is an influencer relations expert to the T, and I'll give you a story that kind of epitomizes this. When I was working back at the CIPR, I would probably say 2012, 13, when influencer relations was nowhere near any of our minds. Scott was in touch and talking about this as an issue in regards to an annual study that we'd run about the industry, and he was saying, I really think you should look into this. And this was a very, very long time ago. So since then, obviously the importance of influencer marketing, influencer engagement has been critical to the point that it's now a really core part of what we do and what our offering should be. So I'm really pleased to be joined by Scott. He's an awesome speaker, and I'm listening. Can't wait to listen to what he has to say. And please do prepare your questions as well, because I know that Scott will be really keen to hear from you with your comments as well. So if I could just ask everyone to pop their microphone on mute for the time being. There'll be an opportunity to quiz Scott afterwards, and we'll have a conversation afterwards. But with that, Scott, it's over to you.
Well, thank you very much for the warm introduction, and well remembered. It was about 2014, I think, when I asked the state of the industry, wasn't it, the state of the profession, and I said, should influencer relations be part of it?
Yeah.
I'm going to talk for about 10-12 minutes now, and so hopefully there'll be some questions at the end. To be interesting if there are or not. Thanks for the setup to say that I'm a great speaker as well. That the only way is down from there. What I want to talk about is that recent reports in the press have suggested that COVID-19 could spell the end of influencer marketing, and yet at least one government has designated influencers as key workers. So what gives? What's going on? Where is influencer marketing headed? And why should PR practitioners give us stuff anyway? So let's start with the bad stuff. Can everyone hear me, first of all? Everyone's mute. That's going to be difficult, but I'm assuming that everyone can hear me. So let's start with the bad stuff. Here are some headlines in mainstream media talking about influencer marketing that I just pulled out at random. Is this the end of influencer marketing as we knew it? Asked Vanity Fair. Could the coronavirus kill influencer culture? Asked Wired. Does the coronavirus pandemic spell the end of influencer? Asked the Metro. And coronavirus killed the influencer market, maybe for good, said Vice. So these headlines all point to a grave and finite future for influencer marketing. But are the articles all founded on objective opinion, or could something else be at play here? And I suspect it's the latter. Increasingly, media mastheads and influencers are vying for the same advertising spend. So there's both an intellectual schadenfreude and a financial incentive for the media to knock the influencer discipline. The realities of traditional media and influencer marketing industries show a very different trajectory. Influencer marketing is on a 40 to 50% compound growth rate. Publishing houses are in decline. Condé Nast, the publisher of Vanity Fair, the author of one of the headlines I've just listed, is currently rolling out a series of pay cuts and laying off up to 300 people. The Metro newspaper staff were offered shares last month in DMGT, the General Trust, in exchange for wage cuts. Vice Media last year laid off 10% of its workforce of 250 people. So outwardly and editorially, the mainstream media viewpoint towards influencer marketing is often very negative, and I've given some reasons why. But I think importantly, inwardly and commercially, many media are looking to or already embracing influencer marketing. So Condé Nast has developed Condé Nast Creative Studios. Hearst has now developed the Hearst Influencer Network. The New York Times bought Hello Society, and now it's integrated it as part of Fake Love, which an internal creative agency, which includes social storytelling and talent management. And News Corp has built The Fifth, a standalone influencer marketing agency and talent agency. And I think the name The Fifth is a clear statement of intent by Murdoch's company, as it appears to be an evolution of the fourth estate, which refers to the press and the media. So that's the end of the bad stuff. And I hope I've provided a credible alternative to why there might be so many negative headlines in the mainstream media today, and why there's such a downer. There are exceptions, and the Financial Times approached me at the end of last year, and with a story thesis of this is the end of influencer marketing, it's just a fad. And I provided some quotes, and I backed up the quotes with a whole list of stats and facts and figures supporting my opposition to the thesis. That article was published on New Year's Eve, so right at the end of Q4 last year. And the journalist was kind enough to include my quote, maintained her thesis that it was just a fad. Fast forward to the end of Q1 this year, So right at the end of March, the same journalist approached me again from the Financial Times and asked me for another quote. And the story was very, very much more positive about influencer marketing in the time of coronavirus and how influencers are tapping into communities. So there are, I've listed five sort of negative headlines, but that doesn't mean that all press are the same. So the coronavirus pandemic has seen influencer marketing become a legitimate communications channel. That's one positive from this global misery that we're now sitting within. Influencer marketing has become, I like to call it the Heineken of comms channels. It's refreshing the parts of society that more traditional media channels are no longer able to reach. So governments, NGOs have realised the potential that influencers offer and allow legitimising the channel. So, for example, we've seen the Finnish government recently reclassifying social media influencers as key workers. They've now been classified as critical actors, and purely for their ability to connect with young who may not get their news from traditional media outlets. In the UK, the Department of International Development is now working with influencers to combat myths about coronavirus and to stop those myths spreading throughout Southeast Asia and throughout Africa. We've seen both the United Nations and the World Health Organization publish open briefs for influencers and influencer marketing agencies to share core messaging around social distancing and the importance of washing your hands. So a key takeaway here now is that influencer marketing is becoming more mainstream and it's become a legitimate communications channel. But COVID-19 was the accelerant, not the spark. COVID-19 did not supply the match. It did bring the gallon of petrol in a can, and it has accelerated the fire of change in the way that influencer marketing has been perceived and utilised. So whilst influencer marketing remains consistent, different outcomes are being explored. And it's worth remembering that at its heart, influencers and influencer marketing is the ability of creating compelling content which sparks conversations, which strengthens connections, which nurtures community, and which converts into action. And that's the important bit, it converts into action. So this action might be a commercial opportunity, i.e. selling stuff, but the opportunity might be something else. So we've talked about how the Finnish government is working with influencers and how the UN is working with influencers and how the WHO is working with influencers. There are different outcomes using the same mechanisms, the same workflow, but to have different goals. So before coronavirus became this pandemic, we saw Michael Bloomberg work with influencers to tap into his short-lived campaign to take on the White House as the next president of the United States. We've also talked about influencers communicating in sort of a crisis management capacity. But last year, Marcus Brownlee, a technology YouTuber, he worked with Samsung in answering questions about Samsung's ill-fated Galaxy Fold last April. And I talk a bit more about that in Kate Hartley's book, Communicating Crisis. So we're talking about coronavirus now and crisis comms, but there have been some brands that have been clever and working with influencers in different capacities for a while, whether it's increasingly in politics, whether it's crisis communications. One of my favorite influencer marketing campaigns in the last 12 months was actually a public safety campaign for ProRail. ProRail is the Dutch equivalent of Network Rail in the UK. And the campaign was aimed at teenagers because despite previous efforts, the number of railway casualties in the Netherlands had tripled since 2016. And so they wanted to tap into influencers to see if they could reduce that rate. So they conducted influencer marketing research. The research discovered a key insight that to affect change with this age group, the content had to be both relatable and shocking. So ProRail, working with Ogilvy, created a fashion brand which featured replica collection of torn clothing as worn by actual railway accident victims. And it was called Victim Fashion Created by Accident. That was the name of the fashion label. They worked with 3 prominent influencers who were in on the project, and they worked with them to hype this new supposed fashion brand. They produced unboxing videos on YouTube, and they commented on the cool distress look of these new clothes. And subsequently, these influencers invited their followers to follow them and to follow the new fashion brand on Instagram. They followed the unboxing videos with a fashion show event to launch the label. And there the influencers who invited their followers, but also journalists were invited as well, mainstream media mixing with influencers and the core audience. Halfway through this launch event, there was a big reveal to the journalists and to influencers that this was actually a campaign to lower accidents on the railways. This was really powerful content. It was upsetting content, but it was designed to be upsetting. It was designed to really get through to a core section of society that weren't listening to other public service announcements, that weren't really watching the television or listening to the radio or reading newspapers. And the key, I particularly like this story, A, because of the impact that it had, but also because it was a great example of an integrated communication strategy. It used research, it used insight. It included traditional media and influencers. It was online with unboxing videos and Instagram posts, and it was offline with a real life launch. The stories behind each clothing item were then discovered in detail on the fashion label's Instagram, and they even set up a fake web store with the descriptions of each, with a description of each item of clothing, told you the story about the accident of that was the inspiration for each item. This year's PR Week Global Award winner for Best Influencer Marketing Campaign went to Ketchum for its activation promoting the need for more stem cell donation to fight blood cancer in children. And here the creative hook was Life Lolly. It was a heart-shaped lollipop that could be used as a DNA swab. But it was heart-shaped, which made it instantly grammable and shareable. And they tapped into a whole lot of influencers to help promote that to their fans. Their fans then reshared that and created their own Instagram moment of them licking the lollipop and taking a DNA swab, which was then sent back to see if they're a good match for some stem cells. The PR Week judges comment praised this activation for strategically and creatively executing with fantastic results, strong creative and powerful impact. And the point I'm making here is that effective influencer marketing programs, they're integrated. They might work with different departments, whether it's true public relations and events and media relations and SEO and microsite building, but they're part of a cohesive, integrated strategy of intent. It's not just buying a few ads or getting Love Island contestant to hold up a shampoo bottle in an Instagram story. It's now part of our industry. And I think, and lastly, the coronavirus pandemic has given our industry a chance to reflect and to recalibrate. And influencer marketing and the content provided by influencers has shown a return to authenticity. It's a remembering of who made the influencers influential. It's not the sponsoring brands, it's the audience, the followers. And so we've seen a lot of a return to that in terms of authenticity. We've seen a return, and we'll see continuing return to storytelling. And we'll see influencers being used to imitate, and where we see influencers used to imitate TV and cinema, we'll now see TV and cinema start to imitate influencers with their production values. Because in lockdown, it's difficult. You can't other disciplines have found it difficult to create content. You can't access studios, you can't access editing suites. Influencers are known for being able to, that they're a one-person media entity. They're used to creating their own content, often in their own homes. So we'll see this blurring between sort of traditional media and influencer media. So I've tried to keep it kind of short and to the point, and I would hopefully there will be a few questions now that I can help answer.
Great, thank you. Thanks so much for that, Scott. That was fascinating, and really appreciate you taking the time to share that. I'd like to kick off with one or two questions myself, and then we can open it up to see if anyone else has any more for Scott. I think traditionally one of the criticisms, perhaps not criticism of influencer relations, but criticisms around this topic has been that relating to measurement, and about how there have been plenty of examples of organizations and brands who have thrown money at influencers and not seen any results in return. And we know largely that that's due to the fact that those influencers had no real relationship with the audience of the brands and the businesses. But do you think that this crisis will, I mean, you said it will accelerate the expansion of the industry, but do you think this crisis will help businesses mature and wise up to influencer relations and how to kind of make the most of it fundamentally?
Yeah, thank you, Corey. I think that there are a couple of strands there. I think that going back to the legitimization of influencer marketing as a recognized communication channel will have an impact going forward. Of course, I think that often there have been complaints that you don't get the results from influencer marketing that you were hoping for, but that goes back to outlaying a proper strategic plan. And often, so I talk about banjo influencers, those people with big number followers that bang another influencer job out without caring about who they're working with or who their audience is as well. Those numbers will fall away as communicators get better at setting good objectives at the front and measuring those objectives at the back. And so one of the positives that's come out of influencer fraud is that it's moved us away from vanity metrics. We used to lionize reach over everything else. So there are a few bad actors that went out and bought fake followers. So then we decided that it's not all about reach, it's about engagement. So those same bad actors went out and formed Insta pods where they would like each other's content and write positive comments about each other. Or you can buy engagement, and that's really cheap as well. So at each time, it's forced the industry to nudge forward away from vanity metrics towards intent metrics and impact metrics. And so, we've talked about, political campaigning in this talk. We've talked about crisis management. We've talked about selling stuff, although very briefly. We've talked about crisis communications. All of those will have different objectives. All will be measured in a different way. But so it's the way you set those up. As a long answer, and I hope it's what you're after.
Yeah, no, that's spot on. Thank you for that. Just actually, while you were touching on ethics and compliance, one of the issues which keeps cropping up is transparency around influencers ultimately not being honest about the endorsements that they're being paid for. Where is that at the moment, do you think, in terms of a trend? Have we reached a point where influencers are kind of behaving, and celebrities indeed behaving more responsibly with that? And what do you think the role is for PR professionals in that relationship?
Another great question. Thanks for the setup. The ASA, Advertising Standards Authority, and the Committee of Advertising Practices released their 2019 annual report last night. Of that report, we know that 1 in 4 online complaints about online ads were about influencer posts. So a quarter of all online advertising complaints were to do with influencers. So to answer your question, no, the awareness isn't there. Not enough people are following up on that. The flip side of that is this is the first time that the ASA has categorized the different subsections within online advertising. And the other point is it's a new discipline, and we're enjoying lots of growth spurts, but with those growth spurts become growing pains as well. So, I think the ASA and the CMA have done a lot in the last year, 18 months to do with building awareness. That's in train. It's part of their 5-year strategy to really embrace online advertising as they do offline. The other point is, we as consumers, we enjoy influencer marketing content, right? I mean, that's a whole different session about the reasons why that is, but we enjoy it with 3 provisos. One, that it gives us some value. It's inspirational or aspirational or entertaining or just interesting. It gives us some value. 2, we don't feel hoodwinked into thinking that bit of paid for content is organic content. And that is, it's that second one, which is a real turn off for us as consumers. If we don't like to feel tucked up, hoodwinked, and if we do, we'll vote for it with our feet and we'll switch off. So it's not just about whether we're going to get caught out by the ASA. There's a commercial imperative for not trying to, dupe your consumers.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point, and it just plays to the basics of kind of ethical principles that apply to all areas of practice. So, yeah, very, very much relevant here. We've got a question that's coming from Jaitika, who's in India, and she asks, hi Scott, during these times when racism, riots and COVID are going hand in hand, do you think influencers who are communicating a different message or doing other promotions will face negativity or backlash in terms of national and social interest?
I think you have. I think each influencer knows their audience, and the audience knows what the influencer stands for, and the influencer knows what their audience is come to expect from them. There is a synergy there. So that doesn't mean, and I was talking to a black influencer this morning, and she said, forgive me, for the last week I've been posting a lot about Black Lives Matter, and of course Black Lives Matter, but also you'll understand that I have a business to run as well, and as long as my content is sympathetic with my values and your shared values, then hopefully that's going to be okay. So I think it's not a definite yes or a definite no. I think it depends on which influencer and which what the type of audience they have.
Thanks for that, Scott. A couple more that have come through. This one from Julia Hurd. She says, now it has become recognised as a profession. Is there enough of a legal framework / best practice in place to better manage influencers, having seen the bad side of it?
Yeah, thank you, Julia. The answer is there are no new rules or regulations. What there is at the moment is a tightening up of existing rules and regulations. So I think, I've said some good things about the ASA, CMA. I think up to 18 months ago, they could have been sort of dismissed as being a bit asleep at the wheel. Now they are being more proactive in how they go about finding online influencer marketing bad traits, and they're correcting those. They're building awareness first before they sanction each influencer. So there is a framework in place. The CMA and the ASA are regulating that, but they're trying to do a softly approach at the moment. I expect that next year we'll see a few more fines being levied. And in terms of best practice, that is up for the PRCA and the CIPR and all the different professional bodies to work with their members and to push the best practice approach. Yes, there is lots of best practice there, but we need to make sure all of our members know about what is the right thing to do and what is the wrong thing to do, and how can you live up to that best practice.
Thanks. I mean, the context was some of my clients work with quite a lot of influencers, and they're smaller brands, so they don't go through influencer marketing agencies. And really, it's kind of providing them guidance. They'll see someone and think, oh, there's a huge following. They'll take them to an event, and we've had cases where we've had to get the police involved, and there's been like sexual misconduct and all sorts of stuff. So it's about providing, I guess, companies that wouldn't necessarily have the kind of the deep pockets of the Nikes of this world with the relevant kind of infrastructure to be able to not compromise their reputation through hiring the wrong people effectively. So that's the context to it.
Thank you. Yes, it's certainly easier to outsource to someone to create a long list of potential influencers. You can do that without having to buy the tool. You can just buy access to that. And then, but the power is, you're talking, Julia, about influencers with big reach. It's about, I think it's more about where their values are and their storytelling abilities. But you have to vet each influencer. Are they right for your brand or for your client's brand? And if you're employing someone new for your company, you don't just trust everything they have on their CV. You do background checks as well. You phone up their ex-employer, or you take references, or you look at what they've done on LinkedIn or how they've behaved on Facebook and stuff. So think about influencers as part of that. So it's about vetting as well as selecting. And there are lots of ways you can do that manually. You don't have to go out to an agency or a platform to do that. They're simple checks that are both sort of data driven and sort of contextually intelligently driven, as in, are they the right, do they create the right sort of look and feel, do they share their values, do they use the right sort of language? And also you should always make sure that you have a contract or a creative brief in place. What are the deliverables? How many pieces of content are they going to create? By when? What happens if they don't do it? Don't pay them all up front in case they don't do it, but have the balance, have a setup fee, but pay the balance on completion, and have a sunset clause as well. So if they behave out of time, you have the right to remove that bit of content. So there are ways around it, but yes, it is a more, if you don't have the money, sadly, it's a more manual process to be able to do that.
Yeah, I'm thinking like a lawyer wouldn't get a job as a lawyer unless they'd been through law school. So anybody can be an influencer. So what are the parameters in which they have to work? It's all that kind of stuff. Yeah. I'll stop talking now and let other people talk.
Well, but by all means, let's have a chat some other time. Give us each other a call or an email, and we'll follow up on that.
Thank you.
Thanks, guys. More questions coming in on the chat box. This one's from Henini. In the business world's battle against COVID-19, influencer marketing budgets are in the front line. How do we as PR professionals educate brands as to when they need influencer marketing, even during challenging times?
I think when we are faced with crisis, we revert to the tools that we're comfortable with, and for many, influencer marketing are new tools, and so they'll be the first to sort of be brushed aside. But it depends, and I won't say that influencer marketing is the panacea. It's not the right fit for every situation. But if your audience is kind of sub 30, there's more chance that they're going to be following someone on social media than they are reading a newspaper. So just very broadly, free-to-air television. The average age is late 50s, early 60s. I think it's the average age for someone watching BBC One is 60, 62 for BBC Two. It's something like 59 for ITV. Even E4, it's something like 45. And on newspapers, again, it's late 40s to 50s and upwards. So if you're trying to tap into a teenage or a 20-something or 30-something audience, it's probably not going to be traditional media anymore. It's going to be about social media, tapping into that. So I mentioned very briefly the PR Week global winner of the influencer marketing campaign. That was done in Germany by Ketchum, remembering for promoting a stem cell swab and for cancer, to protect children with cancer. That was all done pro bono. All of that was free of charge. So it depends. It depends on, you know, the budget. It depends on where you're setting your objectives and the context of the initiative to where the size of the budget is. But I think the realities are, finally, to come back to your question, the realities are, you know, what is the alternative? If people aren't reading the newspapers or reading magazines or reading or listening to the radio like they used to be, how are you going to tap into those audience? How are you going to change their opinions or get them to do something? You have to be where the audience is, and at the moment, increasingly, they're on social media. You know, when we the key way that we now find new brands and new products isn't to Google them anymore; it's to look on Instagram. So, you know, that gives you an idea about where you need to be.
Yeah, I think it's a good point, and it goes back to the fundamentals of knowing who you're speaking to, understanding your audience. And I think before looking at which channels to look at, you really need to have a firm grip on your audience and understand everything about them, their interests, and ultimately where they get their information from. So I think influencer relations very much falls in line with that. We've got another question that's come in from Simon, and he asks, have you seen any good examples of using influencers in B2B campaigns? And do you believe influencers can have an impact in B2B?
I think that in many ways, B2B is the natural home of influencer marketing, or to reuse your phrase right at the beginning, you know, influencer relations. Increasingly in the B2C arena, influencers expect to be paid, and that is their job, is creating compelling content and working with brands on sponsorship deals. In the B2B side, often the biggest influencers are already employed, and their motivations are to increase their influence, to get deeper influence, and to get wider influence. So they want to be first with to see a new report or to hear about a product, and they want to be able to expand their reach globally, or get a deeper understanding of something. So yeah, I think there are plenty of examples in the B2B space of successful influencer marketing. And as I say, you know, it's often the natural home, because it's not so much about paid for, it's about a real interest and subject matter expertise that's leading the way.
Thanks very much for that. I think this is definitely, in terms of people sending questions, we're hitting a new record, because they're still coming through.
Good.
Corey, it's Nick in Germany here.
Sure,
just one that Scott may or may not be aware of that I've seen go through. Sorry for the appearance that I do look like I've just stepped out of a German nightclub. It's not. Various other things going on in the world today, and the weather's not so good. I live in a fairly rural community southeast of Cologne, and one of the things that I've spotted is that the farming community and the agricultural industry, both here and oddly in America, is using farmers who run a video channel or influencers within the agricultural industry in weird and wonderful ways I've not seen before. So whether it's just a day in the life of a farmer, and look, hey, this guy's got a new particular type of tiller, tractor, even down to fertilizers, and they're running seed experiments, which you can see the video, log in, and then you, if you kind of follow it, you can actually download and access all the real-time and figures. I'm not a farmer, so you know, it's just going to be with Nail as well. Are you a farmer? But they're running some fairly interesting campaigns where you can see the fertilization rates of crop A and crop B and all that kind of thing. And it's something that I've never seen before, but they're using influencers in very, very different ways. Like Case, the tractor company, is doing it in the States in a big way. So it's one that I thought just pass on, that maybe it'll be good.
No, I appreciate that, Nick. And I think that's kind of it's a return to subject matter experts, isn't it? That's really what you're saying, and subject matter experts that can tell a story. So I think we're going to see a gradual end to the Love Island contestants that, you know, and I say that the banjo influencers that bang another influencer job out, because they know they've got 18 months. In the sun, they've got 18 months to sell as many products to as many people as possible before they become, you know, redundant or invisible. The people that will remain are the people that consistently create compelling content, and they can do that because they're subject matter experts. And so the thread that's gone throughout today's conversation is knowing your audience, knowing how to influence that audience, and knowing who is influencing that audience. And it sounds like the farmers are those people in the middle that can influence people. And they don't have big audiences, but you can promote, you can amp that voice if the storytelling is there. You can put some paid spend behind it and amplify that voice.
Exactly, it's a good story, and it's been going both. I think in some areas it started out as B2B, but because of the nature of the story and it's really good storytelling and great content, it's kind of gone a bit outside of the window. So that's a bit from Germany.
Thank you very much, Nick.
Thanks very much for that, Nick. I'm conscious that we're almost out of time, so we'll try and keep this one brief. But one's coming from Astrid, and she asks, do you have any recommendations for PR agencies wanted to activate influencers? And what are your thoughts on approaching influencers directly or take help from other agencies and platforms? Can you share any advice on that?
Yeah, it depends what sector you're in. It depends what budget you're in. Increasingly, PR is seen as the discipline that gives away free stuff or invites people to an event, or expects an influencer to do something for free. The perception is that it's moving towards marketing that has the budgets. So that doesn't mean that it should be. And today I've talked about the different outcomes that we all have that exist for successful influencer marketing campaigns beyond just selling stuff. So it depends on what your audience is and what your strategic intent is. If it's a one-off deal, you might be better off buying a long list of prospective influencers and then vetting them yourselves, and then creating a small group of influencers that you use or work with rather time and time again. But if you're building up a strategic capacity or capability in-house, then you need to work on the best practice. So I would just get to know who the influencers are in your specific vertical, see who they're working with already, and I think that the industry is moving towards longer term ambassadorial roles rather than these short tentpole campaigns, and influencers are increasingly more interested in doing a 6 month or a year sort of ambassadorial role or multi-posts, which might be of benefit. And I mentioned that because a lot of the cost of influencers is up front. It's identifying who they are and getting them on board through the contractual process and doing proper vetting. So once you've got them on the roster, it makes sense to keep on working with them over the long haul, and then over time that cost sort of goes down.
Great, thanks very much for that. When we've run out of time, unfortunately, which is a shame because it seems like we've sped through that really quickly. So yeah, just to thank you very much for your time, Scott, and for taking time out to share your insight with us. We really appreciate it. And
well, it's been an absolute pleasure, and I'm very happy to do a follow-up. There is talk of me doing a webinar which expands on what I've talked about, and that's due on the 16th of June, so it's a couple of weeks away. So I'll leave that to you to promote or not promote as the case fits. But I'm very happy to do a follow-up call or talk specifically about a certain area, like best practice, for example, next time.
Great, thank you. And just a reminder for everyone else, we're back to our original times at midday on Thursday. Next week we're going to be joined by Maya Sims, who's the associate editor at Provoke, the trade outlet. So do join us for that, and keep your eyes on your inbox for an update on next week. But thanks very much for your time, everyone, and thank you for joining us. Cheers, Scott.
Thank you.
Scott. Bye,
Thank
guys.
you. Bye.
Bye.